Okay, thank you. So I just start off. This is just giving a highlight, a spotlight on Gabather. Then maybe start with the name. Gabather comes from GABA therapeutics. We focus on development of molecules targeting the GABA receptor in the brain. And thera comes from therapeutics, of course, so next generation of therapeutics against mental disorders. It's a big word, of course. But the GABA receptor, I explain a little bit later, is a key receptor in the mammalian brain, so it will be, it's a very good target for drug development, we think. And my presentation includes some forward-looking statements, of course, which I'm making based on the information that we have today. They, of course, pertain to the future, and they're, of course, projections from my side. So the thing that we focus with the drugs and the drug candidates that we develop is we target part of human experience, and it's called cognition, and cognition is based on how we understand the world, i.e. it includes things like learning, like memory. And as you can see in this particular slide, the way we experience in the world, the way we process it through the cognitive processes in our brain, both to emotion and reason. And we need a functioning, a healthy cognitive process to have a healthy reaction to the world. If the cognitive functions are impaired, then the reaction to the world, as you can see the slide, is non-functional or can be, in worst case, even pathological. So it's these processes that we think our drug candidates have a very interesting therapeutic alternative to diseases that inhibit or debilitate cognitive processes in general, but also other processes. There's a large number of indications within from the CNS, go into the psychiatric field and psychological field, that involve altered cognition. And this can be any indication within psychiatry, ranging from depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, bipolar disorder. You will notice that all these diseases do include some aspect of the symptomatology that has an impaired cognitive process. And the number we have given here in this particular slide of 320 plus million people worldwide is, I think, the absolute lowest. Depends on how broad or how narrow you will see the field of psychiatric disorders. It can be much, much more. So we're talking at least the double of people that are suffering from some form of psychiatric illness at some stage in their life worldwide. And in this particular table, we've looked at which symptoms you have. And in the top row, you can see the diseases that we've lined up. And you can see that all of the diseases do include deficits in cognition, as we have highlighted in red here. Of course, to a different degree. Diseases like Alzheimer's, for example, they are almost defined by a deficit in cognitive processes. Learning is impaired, memory is, of course, almost obliterated. But also other diseases like depression do have cognitive deficits. And even diseases like, not diseases, but conditions that we all suffer from at some stage during every day, for example, stress, also has a negative effect on cognitive process in general. So it's a very common symptom and something that is, of course, very interested if you can find therapeutic alternatives or therapeutic approaches to cognitive processes. The available treatments that we have on this particular slide in psychiatry in general, diseases that affect the CNS, not only GABA-A receptor, of course, there's a large room for improvement. Many of the therapeutic alternatives have side effects. Some side effects are actually quite severe. Many of the diseases have actually no treatment effect. This can be up to 30% in certain diseases where there is no effect of the medication, and you just try something new, something different. And of course, some of them have a long time before you have an onset of your therapeutic effect. In particular, in the case of antidepressants, this can be pronounced, and it's, of course, a very risky period. So this slide just to show that, yes, there are therapeutic alternatives available. Yes, they are good, but there's a huge amount of improvement and research, I think, we should be done, and development that is ongoing to address neuropsychiatric disorders, neurological disorders in general. And the one where Gabather comes in, we target one receptor system in the brain, and this is a very simple analogy. And I take credit for that, for better or for worse. If you compare it to a car, the GABA system is the one that inhibits. This is the brake in the car that slows down the process of the nerve cells in the brain. And the opposite is the glutamate system. It's another neurotransmitter. This is the accelerator, the speeder in the car. And it's, of course, the balance between these two, like if you were driving a real car, that makes it a functioning brain, a healthy brain, a brain that reacts to the surrounding environment in a proper way. This is not to say that, of course, there's a host of other neurotransmitters that are extremely important, also in neurological and neuropsychiatric diseases, like, for example, dopamine, serotonin, in the case of depression. But we focus on the GABA system, and in particular on the GABA-A receptor, which is a subtype of that particular system. So the modulators, or the compounds that regulate, that stimulate this receptor that we work with, that we have developed over the last couple of years, we enhance the activity of the inhibitory nerve cells in a very specific way, in a very selective way, which cells we target. And the whole idea is to go back to the very first slide. You see on the left-hand side that there is some problem with recognition of the experience of the world. So the idea is that with compounds, in this case we take GT002, which is our lead compound, we restore a functional cognitive effect and then restore a healthy reaction to the environment. And as you can see, then the experience is actually restored. That is the general idea. It's a question of restating the balance between inhibitory and excitatory process in the brain through our modulators that target the GABA-A receptor. The market itself, from a financial point of view, the medical need is very, very large, as I showed them on the previous slides. Also, all neuropsychiatric disorders. In all, some it's more pressing than in other ones. In certain symptoms, they are more pressing than other ones. Cognition is certainly, and cognitive deficits is certainly a symptom. There's a very pressing and large medical need. You have to think that we have an aging population, things like Alzheimer's disease, even healthy aging, and cognitive deficits there are an issue where you need to develop therapeutic alternatives. And here I've just lined up, or we have actually lined up, a number of transactions that happened within this field, within the field of neuropsychiatric disorders. And of course, in particular, if you ask what is the potential on a GABA-A receptor modulator within this field, is of course quite big. And the story is about now more than a year old. It's the deal of Biogen that acquired a compound targeting the GABA-A receptor, in this case for depression, for $1 billion plus, which is of course absolutely enormous. I'm not saying that our compounds do the same, but they have the same potential. They target the same receptor and they modulate the same receptor in a positive way, just as the case of these molecules who have a different structure altogether. So what we want to do with our lead approach, we want to aim going for phase 1b, i.e. late healthy volunteer study into 2a, where you then reach out and actually look at patient populations in some of the indications that I've indicated before. So we're actually responding to a large medical need, and of course interest is there from big pharma in CNS disorders again, and in particular now with the effects of corona in the CNS. I think this interest will only increase. There were new networks being made for looking for therapeutic alternatives for CNS effects of corona. And this will, of course, be a story of the coming years as the virulent phase is over and the long-term effects of corona will only be studied, and there will be need for therapeutic alternatives. So GT002, this is our first-in-class GABA-A receptor modulator. It's first-in-class because the molecular structure is new. And on the right-hand side, I have lined up how do you do this kind of experiments. In this case, it's an animal using a very nice animal model, I think. You use the curiosity of the animal to investigate. You put it in the top row. You introduce two objects. It will investigate both of them roughly at the same amount of time. You exchange one object, and the animal is clever. It knows I've already looked at the one from before, the green one. I'm going to investigate the new one more, i.e. it has remembered that it has investigated the green object. It's a very simple, very simplified model of, for example, memory, and the animal actually learned something. So we are now planning to go into a target engagement studies that I'm going to speak a little bit more later. And of course, during the journey with GT002, we've developed quite an interesting patent portfolio, not only covering the substances from a from a composition of matter point of view, but also from formulation, which is something that we are very proud of, which we did in-house, and we submitted actual patent that's being reviewed as we speak. Successful phase 1 studies, we've completed 2 of them in healthy volunteers. There were no side effects that we to mention of. This is amenable for once daily dosing. I think it's very interesting. An oral formulation that is available once daily in a capsule form. I think from a pharmaceutical point of view, it's a very interesting approach compared to what you sometimes have to do formulation-wise to get other compounds into the body. GT002 has no major metabolites. There are no issues there. It has a good half-life. It is a good both catabolism and excretion of the compound are completely okay. So very happy with the so-called pharmacokinetic properties, which is a fancy word for saying how the body treats your medicine that you're taking. So we're very happy about that. And we're now going into the next study. It's a target engagement study. And there we are looking at the EEG and fMRI. fMRI stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging. It's an imaging study. There we will look GT00 given orally. What effect does it have on the function of the brain as studied by EEG, electroencephalography, and fMRI, where in the brain does GT002 work? There are, of course, certain areas that are particularly interesting, learning, memory. We take a look at them. The design of the study is actually very interesting. We look at healthy volunteers. They will get the compound. We look at EEG. They will also get a placebo, so it's a placebo-controlled randomized study. And they will also get a reference compound that acts on the same receptor. So we'll be able to see GT002 passing the brain, modulating the brain activity, and the difference between our compound and the ones that are currently available. And I think the design is very nice because what we do is we use every volunteer as his own control. So every volunteer receives both the candidate drug and the placebo and the control drug with the washout periods of 18 days in between. So this takes a while, although the dosing is only 1 day and the measurement is being made acutely. This study will us then enable to go into phase 2 studies, and we're also able to contact partners that might be interested in a particular activity regarding the EEG, because they might have indications that we right now haven't even thought about yet, but they might be in the future. So we're using EEG as the biomarker, so to speak, as the sensor. How does this affect the brain? And the EEG, of course, then also reflects different indications, different diseases of the brain. So we feel that this is a very good central marker, like a sensor, that we can see where, what effect our compound has, and can it actually restore deficits that you have in the brain. And that is the general difficulty if you work at CNS disorders. It's not like you develop a drug for diabetes, you measure the blood sugar, it goes down, you're happy, you succeeded. We don't have this kind of biomarkers in CNS disorders, be it depression or any other one. So we think EEG is a marker for the effect and the improvement of that you induce with our candidate drugs. And the milestones that we've done, we've developed, and I've talked a lot about GT002. We have other compounds also in our pipeline because we have a model of the receptor. So it's not so that we have a battery of compounds on the shelf and we take them out. We can actually synthesize new compounds. And GT002 is a very nice example of a compound that literally comes from the chemist bench and it's the clinic. It's been in healthy volunteers, and eventually it will really be a truly story from bench to bedside, which was, or perhaps still is, a little bit of a buzzword in drug discovery. So I think these milestones are important because we've pushed GT002 very much, but we do have other things in our strategic reserves, so to speak. In molecules, we have actually 2 patent groups that we have patented. And optimizing the treatment of mental disorders in this particular slide, you can see on this huge green arrow that we've pushed GT002 into the clinic. Everybody, of course, wants to know, that's very good with the research, but does this drug have a chance in the clinic? Can it be actually a therapeutic option? And the answer is, yeah, we're exactly at the borderline there between 1B, we still work with healthy volunteers, and phase 2, which eventually go into patients. That's the plan. And particularly in this slide, I would like to mention that we still continue doing preclinical research on GT002, and we have published recently a press release. We've done some very interesting studies, partners in the US, where we looked at the effect of GT002 acutely on looking at some parameters in brain activity of animal models of Alzheimer's disease. The data amount is still very low, but it definitely looks promising, and we're going to follow up very vigorously to get this data to a larger data volume, to look at other parameters. But it looks actually very interesting. And from us, from the scientific point of view, and this is a research-based company, you know, curiosity is the mother of many good inventions, and this results makes us very, very curious, looking forward to work with them in the future. And the GT00X is a little bit lonely in the left-hand corner. These are the compounds that are in the pipeline that we are developing preclinically in labs in Södertälje, but also with a lot of networks around the world regarding academic collaboration and collaborations with CROs, which were quite active. Again, going back to a situation with corona, we've been approached by a number of networks looking at compounds that could modulate corona in their models, participating in them. It's very nice. So this is a busy slide. It's leave it to everybody to read them. The key thing, I think, is line number 4, that we actually do have a library of compounds, and we have a model of the receptor that we can generate new compounds after GT002. And it's a GT002 project that is going into the target engagement study, which after that will enable us then to find a partner in an indication, and then do either licensing out of the project or do a joint development project together with them. So that it would be then the commercialization aspect of the GT002, of course. Then the idea that the revenue generated there reinvest into Gabather and into the pipeline compounds, which are all of them targeting the GABA-A receptor, and all of them working on CNS disorders. I mean, the market is still there. And I don't know if this is a very last slide I got just to show the team of my colleagues, Stefan and Christine, that work with me in the lab, and of course the board of directors is all very, very experienced people in drug discovery. And I have not had a chance to update this, but just to mention that one of the board members, founders of Gabather, the person we worked at the model together with Olof Sterner, Mogens Nielsen, he passed away tragically a couple of weeks ago, actually. And I think the very last slide I have is, I don't know if this animation works, it's something really fancy, of a fMRI scan of the brain, where you see different slices of the brain, and I think I will leave it at that. I don't know if I'm within 20 minutes. I think I am. I'm between 19 minutes and 59 seconds, so I think I clap myself on the shoulder for good timing, and I thank you for your attention.
Very, very well performed, Michael. Now, let's start with, you mentioned it in the presentation as well, you press released now on Monday.
Monday, that's right.
Tell us about the data from this preclinical study.
Yeah, so this was a pilot study, as we mentioned. There's a very limited number of animals. It's an animal models of Alzheimer's disease, so what you do with these animals have a gene defect, and they develop Alzheimer and Alzheimer-like symptoms. And what we did is we treated these animals IP at the outside of the brain, and we looked at a certain parameter of a brain frequency that declines during the development of Alzheimer's disease. And we could observe very nicely that given GT002, you restore this activity. The researchers at Harvard call it a rescue of the brain activity, and I think that's a very nice term, actually, because you're restoring an activity that wasn't there before. There's a lot of room of improvement, how to improve this kind of experiments. We can look at doses, we can look at dosing regime, we can look at modes of application, but this has opened the door of this first part of the next part of the journey of this particular, remind you, preclinical research. This is an animal model of Alzheimer's disease.
And we've also had questions about the share issue, of course. What will the cash be used for?
The cash will be used mainly for the preclinical development of the compounds in the pipeline, and to ensure that we have enough cash for driving the GT002 to the next partnering solution. And the idea is, of course, to go out with a new emission of shares and get funding in before the funds become too scarce. So, of course, we always need funds. In this case, it will be the preclinical, and also starting to look at that we can secure funds to look at planning for clinical trials in patients in the future.
How did you settle on, you're taking in 18 million. How did you settle on that sum? Would you need more, or?
No, we need, I mean, we've presented all the use of the proceeds in a financial hearing presentation. So I think there's no change from there. Again, the main thing is the use of the preclinical trial. The trial of the target engagement study is already funded and budgeted for. It has been budgeted actually all the time.
All right. And how's the interest been from institutional investors? Any new ones?
There's quite a lot of interest. And since this compound has been through 2 clinical trials, the interest is actually only getting bigger. And there's a little bit of a catch-22 because there are a lot of interest also from smaller potential partners. But we have to be a little bit careful, and that's why sometimes not too specific in the information that we give out, because a lot of people are benchmarking GT002 against their own projects, not within GABA, but within the indications that we're working on. So we've become a little bit more careful regarding that. But we are definitely always talking to people, and if you think about the timelines, I think that's interesting for everybody. General rule of thumb is 1 year once you start partnering discussions to actually come into some sort of agreement. All depending, of course, on how good the results look like.
Yeah, and following up on that, we talked about, my first question was about the Alzheimer's preclinical study. If GT002 proves work, like that it's working in that field, are there any competition with similar substances on Alzheimer's?
No. I mean, the thing is that, you know, Alzheimer has been very much focused on compounds or molecule types like antibodies. And this is a small molecular weight compound. It's a traditional medicine, think aspirin, a type of small molecule. So this kind is, to my knowledge, there might be certainly nothing targeting the GABA-A receptor or of the similar molecular structure that's been used within cognition.
I'm sorry to hear as well that Mugens passed away, as you mentioned here in the slide. What challenges do you face now that one of the founders are no longer with us?
Well, listen, thank you for mentioning it. I mean, challenge number one is, for me, I'm the one that is just going through the hard disk and all the data that Måns has accumulated. Challenge number two is, of course, to keep all the scientific contacts that we had through Mugens with the community intact, and I think we've done a good job at that. And regarding the challenges, they are mainly regarding the research on the preclinical pipeline, because Mugens was a preclinical researcher. For the clinical part regarding GT002 and development, it will just carry on. He had not been involved in that aspect. But of course, for me personally, it's a very big loss. I worked together with Måns for 35 plus years. So there's a huge gap to fill in, yeah.
Of course. And staying here in the sentimental part, if you're looking back at your time as CEO, what have been your biggest achievements?
I think my biggest achievement was when we finished my biggest achievement was when we received the first prototype of the GT002 drug with the formulation that we made, and we're ready for clinical trials. Because in my opinion, the transition between preclinical and clinical research is the biggest step that you can do in a small biotech company. And there are many that never get there in any case. So we've jumped over that one. We've done the clinical trials in healthy volunteers. So I think we've done quite well. And I think that step would be my biggest achievement. I don't know if it's my biggest achievement, as soon as our biggest achievement, because it's a team that I'm only part of.
Nice words, Michael Robin Witt, and a very nice presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time and presenting here.
I thank you.